So let's start right in with that, because this chief management officer, you were the deputy CMO, and that was the thing. But now that there's a full-on CMO, third in line at the Pentagon, can you explain for our audience who might not be as familiar, what is the CMO role?
So, Aaron, I think it is good to be able to tell the people watching really what the CMO does. As the department has grown over time, many have said, okay, the business operations of the department have come so substantial that there needed to be one person that could focus on that. And as a resulting of legislation in both 2017 and 2018, that's what occurred in February of this year. The CMO position came into being. So my responsibility is to oversee the business operations of the department. I look at it that we have the basic blocking and tackling that goes on every day in providing services within the building, within the leadership of the department. But one of the responsibilities that's been added as a result is addressing the Secretary's one of his three priorities, which is reforming the Department of Defense. And that squarely falls into my lap. That's a lot of what we focus on every day is reform. And so it's rather substantial, but we're willing to take that on. And of course it requires alignment across the department and certainly collaboration and integration. And that's exactly the way we're approaching it.
So Nextgov, the primary publication I work for in our group, we're mostly IT focused, and I want to get into a lot of those IT things. But let's start with some of the reform stuff, because even that touches IT. I think it's going to be a recurring theme here.
Right.
One of the things that's been coming up a lot with the NDAA is the fourth estate cuts. They've been talking about, there was an initial push to possibly get rid of DISA, now it's looking at Washington headquarters, and it's been put on your office to look for a 25% reduction and a substantial reduction in those, what's called the fourth estate. What is the fourth estate, and how are you looking at reform issues targeting those?
So your question on the fourth estate and some of the pending legislation that's been proposed by Chairman Thornberry is very relevant to what we're doing. First of all, the fourth estate has many different definitions, as you can imagine, but we look at it as the Office of the Secretary of Defense plus the defense agencies and field activities. Now, some of the specifics of the legislation which has been proposed exclude some parts of that, such as the intelligence community and some other areas. But I think if you focus on that as what really is, I'd say it's the corporate headquarters, for lack of a better way to put it. As far as the proposed legislation, yes, I think the details are left to be ironed out and see where it actually ends up after it goes through the process. But I would say the same thing to you in the audience that I've said to Chairman Thornberry, and that is in spirit, we're aligned with where he's going with this. If you look at it, anytime you look at efficiencies across the enterprise, you have to be willing to look at the corporate headquarters. And then frankly, from a credibility standpoint, the fact that I'm a part of OSD, I think it just says I have to be willing to look at our own organization as well. So I think there's plenty of opportunity there. I think the way we've looked at it and how we're going to look at going about it is you have various lines of business within the fourth estate that execute their mission. And we want to start to take a look at those from an end-to-end process. You have a lot of the defense agencies and field activities that are quite aged. The oldest, I think, was 1951. The average age is approximately 42 years old. Anytime in an environment, whether it be private sector or government, I think we owe it to ourselves to take a look at saying, okay, roles, responsibilities, end-to-end process, where do people fit? I think many of these defense agencies and field activities have very relevant missions, but the question is, where do they fit? Where do they best fit? Is there potentially duplication, overlap? Is there an area that it can be done more efficiently and effectively? So we owe it to ourselves to say, all right, let's begin this process to look at what we'll call the fourth estate and say, all right, horizontally, this way, And vertically, let's take a look at how we're doing business, and then let's let data drive what the ultimate conclusion is. So as it relates to the pending legislation, I would say in spirit we're aligned. I think how we execute it is something we're about to begin, and we'll let the data tell us where to go with it.
Because I think that's one of the interesting things that much on the civilian side, they're looking at more and more shared services. They're trying to get things out of agencies and into centralized areas, versus with these recommended cuts, it seems almost the opposite, that the look would be to decentralize rather than bring things in. Are you focused more on streamlining existing capabilities within the fourth estate, or picking out the important parts and putting them out into, say, the branches or other areas?
Well, I think your question is really insightful. I would say the answer is yes and yes to the fact, are we looking at decentralizing, centralizing, bringing in the services into the equation? The answer is yes, because we may find that there are centers of excellence in doing a mission, providing a service that may have existed and developed in a service. And if we can leverage that across the enterprise, then to take the time and effort to stand up something new to accomplish that is just inefficient. So we're willing to look at bringing the entire enterprise into the equation. And I will say that it's very, very impressive how willing the services are to be part of that discussion. Because at the end of the day, we're all aligned in where we want to end up is, if we can lower the cost of doing business, then that allows us to return those resources back to priorities that the enterprise needs to execute. That's available to the military departments and the secretary to say, here's where I want to put emphasis and priorities. And all of this, of course, builds up to the National Defense Strategy.
Have you started that review process?
We are just now beginning. We've started to have some informal conversations in the various aspects of the Fourth Estate and the military departments. And so we've begun to socialize that and explain it. Frankly, we've met with great receptivity that says, okay, I understand. If I'm capable of being more efficient in my end-to-end process and potentially putting non-core missions somewhere else where it can be done more efficiently, then those resources come back and I get to prioritize those where I really need them. So we've begun to talk about it. I think this summer is when we'll really be kicking off this more in a formal process.
Are there any no-goes? Are there any areas where you've looked at it from your experience and you say, this agency or this function is too critical, we can't touch it?
Well, I would start with a blanket statement and say there's no sacred cows, because if you're going to do this right at the enterprise, you have to be able to look at everything. Now, again, some of the proposed legislation walls off some particular areas, but it's still, I think the opportunity exists for us to still have a conversation in those areas and be able to say, just let us provide you some data and you make a decision on the best way to provide an end-to-end process. And then there's another, which is simply a business decision, where in a common saying, is the juice worth the squeeze? So we have to look at the data and say, what is really the validity of potentially changing this or disrupting that for what we might get out of it? But I would say overarching, what's really important, let's not forget the mission comes first. So our goal is to say, how do we execute the mission, retain the mission, do it in the most efficient and effective way, and then, okay, now what can we do to help make that more robust, but it's do no harm?
You've mentioned data a number of times so far in conversation, and I was struck by that in the language establishing the CMO, that was such a big part of, it was one of the three pillars establishing the position, was you have to use big data to make management decisions. In this time where we are today, shouldn't that just be a given? Why was that given such prominence in the legislation, you think?
Well, and your question on data and where it fits into the whole discussion, and the fact that when you get in the private sector, you say, well, it's just a given. Data is important. I would say, to your question, absolutely. You are correct. I've had the good fortune to be in the private sector most of my life, yet also have worked in the government before. And data is critical. Good data is critical. That's how you then make good decisions. But I would have to say, and we admit fully as a department, just the way we've evolved with our processes and our systems, that the access to data, the quality of data, the timeliness and relevance isn't always consistent. So I think it's from that, everybody admitting we can do better, is where language came into the law. We see that all that we're doing is foundational on good data, period. And so we're working to take what's beginning to really become more robust in the services across the Fourth Estate and maximize that so that good data is available by all. I might give you one thing that we're doing in specific that is we find has been invaluable. We began a look at what it costs, various aspects of what it costs within the department. Not what we spend, but what it costs. And it's been fascinating because, of course, as you can imagine, early on we found that as we started mapping that the definition of an item and what it costs over here may not be the same over here. The data here may not be available over here. So building that critical foundation to map together so that we're talking about a consistent definition, it's available and it's timely and it's relevant. What it has spurred is tremendous discussions because as soon as you have that great data, you can look at outliers, you can make analysis, and then it drives that next level of conversation, which is, okay, now that we have it, how do we make good decisions? And it goes back to an earlier question where potentially one group might share a best practice or might become a center of excellence because the data shows, wow, you're doing this really super. So that's an initiative we've taken on. We found it to be just incredibly valuable as we start to make decisions and how we allocate resources and where we put work.
You know, I'm a bit of a data nerd myself, and dirty data is the scourge of my existence, right? When things aren't apples to apples, it's just about useless. How much of that are you running into? What's the plan to clean that up? Because you have mandates to use this data in a very short succession. How are you ensuring that you have good data and that you will continue to get good data?
Well, in the question of dirty data and I think inconsistent or the inability, again, to compare an apple and an orange, I think is essential to address because, again, if not, you erode a quality and then you erode quality of decision making at the business level. That's where I think our office can actually add great value because we've been allowed the authorities and where we sit, we can work amongst where all that data resides and help be that mapping function. We can be that arbitrator of, all right, are we comparing an apple and an apple, access to data to make sure that all have access to data, so we truly start to drive to that purity that I think everyone's looking for when they're trying to make good decisions based on good data.
So one more on the data. Again, the latest in the latest NDAA legislation, they double down on data again and give you very strict rules on what they want you to do. Business management and operations data sets, that's what they want you to use. So what kind of data are you looking for? Because it even says like 3 to 5 data sets for your initial pilot program. It's very specific language. What kind of data are you looking for, and what operations specifically are you looking to apply it to as for your first go around as you start to feel this out?
So taking the law into account and driving to determining good data sets, goes back to the initiative that we're working on within the CMO's office and providing good cost data. Part of what we do, Aaron, is we align it to our reform teams, areas that they're working. So it could be in contracting, it could be in real property, it could be in HR, it could be in IT. And by putting that together, one, it gives us something to focus on, which is a shared service which is relevant. But then it also gives good data for the teams to use as they start working projects, so they go hand in hand. And you end up being able to have good conversations as a result of a project because you have good data. We're focusing on that first. We think that will capture, by the time you go through the first 9 teams, is that we think that'll capture about 80% of the data that we would be looking for. And then we'll go back and see what's out there that we really need to focus on. But it's allowing us to, from a timeliness standpoint, to put the right data in the right hands at the right time.
What's that timeline look like?
I think we're looking at the end of next calendar year. And we have each of these projects sequenced out where we pick one, we focus on it, we do all the mapping, we do all the collection, we create that structure, we understand the gaps, and then we're able to present it in a capacity and apply then tools to it that do the analysis for the user.
Another thing in the NDAA is it notes that it wants you to use at least, I think it was 3 to 5 non-public data sets. Why was that included in there? Is DOD currently in your big data efforts, are you generally using public data sets? Why are they encouraging you to use data that's more sensitive?
Well, on the question of the specifics of the law and using public and non-public data, I would tell you, Aaron, I'm really not sure what was behind that, but we do use both sets. What is available in the public domain, because of who we are and how we have to report things, can be very valuable. But then, of course, the internal data, which is often proprietary, is very, very helpful as well. I would say that one of the aspects is that when you can use that internal, now you cross-cut across the entire enterprise. So you don't get siloed with perhaps just one service, one area of the fourth estate or the department, that it truly says, let's look at all the data so you get the best information.
So talking more about the CMO role in general, management is right there in the title, but 2 of the 3 pillars are very distinctly IT focused. How much of the CMO role is about technology and the use of IT?
Well, a lot of what we look at as we seek to find efficiencies within the business operations of the department, I think you would probably agree with me that IT is an automation of a process. So they often go hand in hand. As we look at making the processes to execute more efficient, the IT goes along with that. Now, what we don't want to do is use IT to accelerate a bad process. So we have to be very cognizant of, let's find a good process, let's make sure the IT is there to support it. Then you have the opportunity to look at IT in itself and say, is this being executed in the most efficient and effective manner? That's why having the IT reform team as one of the 9 is so important, because it is a great shared service. It does cut across the entire enterprise, and frankly, it's foundational to a lot of the reforms and efficiencies we're seeking.
Do you know the 9 teams off the top of your head?
So you kind of got me at a test there. Yeah. IT, contracting for common goods and services, log and supply, healthcare, financial management, test and evaluation, community services, HR, and then real property are the 9 reform teams that we have and we use to look at specific projects to go after enterprise-wide.
So let's talk about then the last overarching topic I want to cover, which is the third pillar of your mandate, which is the Cloud Steering Committee. DOD is looking to move all of its major processes into cloud and figuring out how do you do that in a holistic way, in a secure way, and all that. So what is the status of the Cloud Steering Group, and what is their mission?
So if you look back at when a lot of this started, the Deputy Secretary said, okay, hosting of data is incredibly important. Hosting it in one place is incredibly valuable to us. It gives us security, it gives us access, it gives us the ability to apply higher level capabilities. Going to the cloud is important, and it's of incredible valuable to us. So at the time, from a management standpoint, the team was just getting filled out, and he said, all right, I don't have everybody, so let's get together a steering group to keep this going forward. It's too important not to. It's important to the warfighter and their access to data and being able to execute their mission, and it's important from a business standpoint. So I think that at that time, Ellen Lord took that, and she says, I'll run with it. Then I came into the picture, and Ellen's plate is certainly full. She has tremendous amount of responsibility in the acquisition and sustainment world. And so we said, okay, I'm around. This directly relates to data. This relates to reform and IT. I'm happy to keep shepherding this along. And so now we're fortunate that we have Dana Deasy, a very accomplished person from the private sector that understands this. And now he can focus, that's his day job. He can focus on that every day. And I'm allowed to now go back to my day job. And we do collaborate. So the Cloud Executive Steering Group is simply evolving with both the subject matter and then the people, the leadership team available to execute it.
Is that team still reporting up through you?
At this point, yes. I think now that Mr. Deasy is here, I think that we'll want to evaluate that in the most efficient manner to execute. But to your earlier questions, that IT is important to reform, no matter what, I will still remain involved in what's going on in the hosting of data and the execution of our IT and our systems.
So when we talk about cloud and DOD, most people following this think of two major contracts that are coming up, the JEDI contract and the DEOS contract. Are there any other major cloud initiatives that that steering group is focused on?
Well, I would highly recommend to get a great idea about where we are in hosting of data, how we're going to execute that over time with a plan, that you have a conversation with Dana Deasy. I have been amazed at his grasp of how this rolls out with a very thoughtful process to do so. I think I would leave you with the fact that we know where we are today, that getting started and starting to get data to an enterprise-wide cloud is valuable. Again, for security, for access to data, for the ability to apply higher level capabilities to that data, and then the benefit to the warfighter and being able to take that information to the tactical edge. So going to an enterprise-wide solution is a good thing. The longer-term overall strategy as we begin to migrate hosting and what we're going to do with hosting, I think is a great question for Dana Deasy.
So we'll get into that nitty-gritty with Dan, especially as he starts to get his hands around everything that's going on. But as the leader up until that switchover happens, can you give us a taste of where we are with those two big contracts that we're watching? So with JEDI, what is the timeline for that RFP to come out and to keep that moving forward?
So again, Aaron, I think on this one, Dana's here. I think there was an announcement this morning saying that Dana now has taken over the JEDI effort as well as hosting of data and migration in the cloud. I wouldn't want to get ahead of him, so I would respectfully suggest that'd be a great conversation to you to have with him about that and a lot of other subjects in that area.
And then the other one, the DEOS, that RFP was supposed to be out by the end of this month. To your knowledge, is that still on track?
I really, at this point, I'd yield to Dana on that, because I am not following that on a daily basis, and a lot of these truly are real time. So I'd defer to him on that.
One more on cloud, and it's more of an overarching question than these specifics. What is the overall goal with JEDI and DEOS? What enterprise state are you trying to get DOD to?
Well, again, on where we want to end up on hosting of data, because that's what this is really all about, is that when you can host data in what is often called a data lake, and it provides tremendous advantages. It provides advantages in security. It provides tremendous advantages in access. And it also has great abilities to apply higher level capabilities. So from a business standpoint, from my perspective, that's nothing but positive, because it allows us to use data to make good business decisions. I think from a warfighter standpoint, it's the same. It's of great benefit, because now the access to data that is secure and has the ability to apply potentially higher level capabilities to accelerate then makes them more efficient and effective in what they do. And the orders of magnitude that we've seen in the difference in both the access to data and the quality of data and the timeliness of data is the type of thing that you're getting at the tip of the spear really can make a significant difference. So the hosting of data at an enterprise-wide level is really nothing but a positive for us as a department.
Why is it that in order to do that properly, you're looking to the private sector? Why isn't DOD building its own cloud and operating that at that level? So how we ultimately execute this hosting strategy, I would, again, Aaron, I'd suggest that's a great conversation for Dana, because now you get into architecture and infrastructure plans on how to scale and phase where we're going with hosting, and I really would defer to him on that. Final wrap-up question. What is a win for the first CMO? You're the first guy to step into this position. It's rather wide-ranging and a lot of very specific mandates at the same time. In 2 years, in 6 years, what does a win look like?
So my definition of success would be that early on we have found projects that meet that threshold to say we have found an enterprise-wide efficiency that we can then deploy. So with doing such, we start to build credibility to the concept. We start to build alignment and trust across the enterprise. And then I think as importantly is through governance and management, we start to bring this as an institutional process, so that for whoever comes next or many roles to come, and the benefit of the department is that the lowering the cost of doing business, returning resources to the warfighter, being good stewards of the taxpayer, just comes as a natural to us. I would define that as success.